Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and those of you that are following my channel know that I, in the late 70s, was a chase pilot out at Edwards in the Air Force Flight Test Center. Now, I've had a couple people say, hey, tell us some F-4 stories. Okay, well, it brought to mind one F-4 stories. Now, I wasn't actually flying the F-4, Bobby, who was the head of flight test operations, because this was a high-risk mission, and I thought I was witnessing the airplane blow up in front of me. Okay, it kind of got my attention, and that's, well, um, I was a chase pilot, and this is my fighter pilot scarf. I was putting it on to add credibility, but we as chase pilots we didn't have scarves, so I better take it off because this is a totally a chase pilot tale, and it has to do with me, like I said, thinking I saw an aircraft explode while I was chasing it. Well, I was a chase pilot out at Edwards, the Flight Test Center. I was also an IP, an instructor pilot, and I was the senior flight examiner in the T-38. So I was having a fun time. Now, chase missions are, they're the meat of what goes on out there. Well, of course, the test missions are the meat, but the chase, you have to chase the aircraft to get the data and for safety and photo and things like that. And chase missions were very interesting. A lot of them could be really routine. We had to do refueling tests with the advanced air refueling boom. This is a picture of the old boom, but we had to refuel the F-15, the F-4, the F-16, the A-10, the B-1, the C-5. That was really interesting because the bow wave on the tanker, I digress on that, would really influence the KC-135. But those missions were fairly routine. We take off, we go up there, and a lot of times you'd trade. It was kind of funny. You'd trade out chases because the tanker could stay up a long time, much longer than the chase. So one of the chases would be chasing a refueling like in the F-16, and they're getting all these data points and stuff. And then the chase is going to run out of fuel, and we use the T-38 primarily for any chase because it was just cheap and easy to operate. So he would be getting low, and now I would come up with another chase, or vice versa, but we kept cycling off. So they ran out of chases faster than they ran out of aircraft doing the test mission. But anyway, these were fairly routine missions. And when we were doing envelope expansion, flutter testing, and stuff like that, that was also a fairly routine mission because we would have to slowly approach each point, sometimes by 100th of a Mach number. And one time I saw flutter. I saw some really interesting stuff chasing, and that's what I'm talking about, this F-4. I'm giving a little bit of background before I get there, okay? But I saw a lot of interesting stuff, and I saw flutter on an F-5, which was just, I'd never seen an aircraft go wild like that. And that, I yelled terminate, ground yelled terminate, because they saw, everything going haywire. It's kind of interesting, but anyway, a lot of different aspects to being a chase pilot. Now, like I said, some get to be routine, but the interesting thing is, almost every chase mission could be different, and that really was interesting. And there were a few things that you had to know as a chase pilot. I was checked out, and then later, as an instructor, I checked people out and doing chase. There's various aspects of chasing very large aircraft, especially when you have to get up under them. I had a chase mission where I had to get up under the engines there, right below the aircraft. And of course, the whole thing with the XB-70, you got to watch out for wake turbulence because that can be really, really bad. And they didn't really understand it that well back then. So I got a very good briefing on how to not get yourself killed chasing a large aircraft. And I would set under those two engines there on the right, and that forward bomb bay door there, they would launch SRAM missiles at very high speed, very low altitude, all classified at the time. I don't know if it still is, but they never tell you it's not. And that was a very interesting chase mission. And I chased the B-52. They did things like they dropped the F-111 capsule, and we had other missions. And it was interesting to chase that thing because you're off on the side, and that wingtip is flapping 17 feet, and it's like there's no wingtip in the star in this baby. So chase position was kind of fun. And there were unique things like chasing ejection seat tests. I also chased the air launch cruise missile recovery parachute where they would drop it, and I'm chasing a falling object that's deploying a parachute. And that's kind of interesting because you cycle around. All these things, you had to really kind of think about it. They were different. Some missions were quite exciting where they were testing weapons, which is kind of one of the things you do. Being a military, it's you're not going cross country here. You're designing and testing weapons. So that's very interesting. Trying not to be the target, but the chase aircraft. And this was one of the really fun ones, was when they were clearing the Mavericks off of the F-16. I chased a lot of those, and this is one of the photograph of one of the missions I chased. But okay, we've got an F-4 mission. Now, the whole deal here, and this is kind of interesting and tells you how much I'm dated. When I was in the Air Force, JP-4 was it. That's all we had. And they were looking at, expanding and operations at NATO, and they did this thing called JP-8. And, of course, they ended up phasing out JP-4 because it was, flammable and hazardous and stuff like that. So now everything's JP-8. They ended up, they're making the transition in 79. These test flights were in, I believe, 78. And, they completed the changeover by 95. But anyway, one of the things they had to do was they had to test that JP-8 would function properly in our aircraft, because it, had certain different parameters. It didn't light off quite as well, stuff like that. So Bobby, who was the head of flight test out there in the late 70s, really, really nice guy, signed a nice picture of, when I was going to the airline. You're gonna miss all of this, but you'll forget about it going to the bank. But anyway, he was the chief of flight test out there for the fighters, so he's flying this mission, and I am flying as chase. And it's kind of interesting because you have to do various envelope aspects, and the one we are doing here was going to be a high angle attack and actually into stalls. Okay, so what they did was one engine. It was I believe the left engine operated on JP-4, and they had the tank set up so the right engine operated on JP-8. So that way they could fly it through the envelope and see any issues. Well, one thing they wanted to do was they wanted to do stall type maneuvers, and they had the aircraft. We were going high angle attack and getting into a stall, and the thing was ratcheting and that, and I'm chasing it. And it's kind of interesting because the aircraft's going down and you have to circle around it. This is the good old T-38 here that we use for chase. And the interesting thing was we didn't have a photo chase here. It was just two pilots acting as safety chase. They didn't feel any need to have a photographer. There wasn't certain, like weapon separations where you want that. So it was just two pilots, and myself and Jack. Jack was the ops officer. I was captain. He's a major. Jack is, above me in the whole hierarchy and things like that. And I'll tell you about Jack later, because aviation is a small world. That's why you don't want to tick people off. And, you don't want to burn bridges, because it's a small world, and not that was a tendency or anything to tick people off, but it's interesting how things come around, and that's what I'm going to tell you about Jack. Now, okay, we got the chase mission. We're chasing the aircraft. He's doing this, stalls, ratcheting type of maneuver, because the airplane tends to do this when it gets into a high angle attack stall type of thing. And the right engine with the JP-8 flames out. Okay, that's interesting. Whole bunch of vapor comes out, and the vapor goes up, goes around the tail, comes to the other side. The other engine is still in afterburner, and the when the big plume of JP-8 vapor that the engine was still pumping out, because it was still turning and the pumps were still running and stuff, all of a sudden it touches the afterburner of the other side, and there the airplane is engulfed in a fireball. And it's like, holy crap. That was interesting. Not something that I was expecting to see at all. We figured, if anything, the engine would just flame out, and that would be the test point, but it ignited, and they actually got a restart on the engine. Well, that was kind of fun. Okay. Bobby made the mention of, he was looking in the mirrors during this maneuver, and he looked back there, and he saw the big plume of vapor, and then it torched off, and he said he's looking at two full mirrors of fire. And that got his attention for a second, but it cleared almost immediately. But yeah, that was one of the surprises of chasing an aircraft in flight test, and I had a lot of surprises like that. It's kind of interesting. It was just a very interesting job. Something was always different. And okay, so cover the F-4. We recover the T-38, goes back, we land. And of course, I knew Jack out at test ops and stuff like that, and we probably flew together a few more times. And I decided, they were going to put me in a ground job because I was getting a double master's in aeroelectrical engineering, and they wanted to put me in charge of the F-16 flight control section. I didn't want to do that. Non-flying job, long story short here. But anyway, I decided, well, all my friends were getting airline jobs. I wasn't going to fly a desk, so I bailed, and I got this airline job. And of course, I talk about this in other videos. I got it, hired, furloughed, all this other stuff. But anyway, I get out and I get this airline job. Well, unbeknownst to me, and I get hired by United, promptly furloughed out of training center, but still, not too bad. But unbeknownst to me, Jack gets out shortly after I got out. Okay, well, he goes to work for Pan Am. And as we all know, Pan Am didn't have a very good history. We ended up buying their Pacific division, and they essentially went out of business. Well, later on, United hired a lot of the Pan Am pilots. So I'm 27 captain. I am down in Peoria. I'm going to pick up the 727. We've had our layover there at Juniper's Castle, and I'm going out there, and I'm going down the jetway. And back then, when I was in the Air Force, I didn't have this mustache, and it actually it confused a lot of the people I knew, because I'd meet the test pilots and stuff later, and they'd look at me for a second. I'd have to cover the mustache, and then they'd recognize me. But I'm going down there, and I got my captain's hat on and everything, because I was the dutiful person, who wore his hat back then. And I come on there, and the second officer starts telling me about some issue with the airplane. And I don't remember what the issue was, but I look at him, and I go, Jack? And he stops a second, he looks at me, and I go, Jack, and I'm not going to give his last name out here to protect his privacy to some certain degree. And he looks at me again, he seems a little confused, and I cover up the mustache, and I go, Ron Rogers. And he goes, oh my gosh. And he goes, well, funny thing, we both ended up here at United. And he goes, well, how did your seniority work out? And he looks up, and he sees the captain's hat, and he goes, well, it must have been pretty good. You're a captain, I'm a second officer. And that was the trouble. It ran in with the TWA guys who, got hired at the same time. And I tell a story about it. A TWA guy that got hired at the same time I got hired by United. TWA turned me down, thank God. But they accepted this guy. United accepted me. And a bunch of time later, I'm a 27 captain. This guy comes in and he tells me he went through TWA, they folded, and now he's got hired by United second officer. And I look at him and said, if I had been hired by TWA and you'd have been hired by United, you would be in this seat, the captain's seat, and I'd be the second officer. So it's really funny how things work. And Jack, who was, a very high and well-respected figure in his, position out there at Edwards, now he's a second officer. Not that, all these positions aren't respected and stuff like that, but it's a real change in command structure. And there was other people like that I knew in the military that were very high ranking above me, and now they're coming back as my second officers or co-pilots. Anyway, that can be a very interesting dynamic. But that is the story of the F-4 chase, where I thought I was witnessing an airplane blow up right in front of me. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Thanks for watching.